have begun to realize that you can listen to silence and learn from it. It has a quality and a dimension all its own. He who does not understand your silence will probably not understand your words. I always remembered since I was a child, I really thought that I was going to grow up and that I was going to be someone someday. In my silence, I dreamed that. Hi, this is Sandra Hart at Life Over 60. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's going to be a little different today because I'm going to be talking about something that I'm really interested in, and that is the silent generation. And what brought this up, I was watching on YouTube, and there is a podcaster from Melbourne, Australia, called Amber Petty, and she did a special series on my generation, the silent generation. Now, that is from 1927 to 1942, and that is where I fit. I don't think, as far as I know, that there are any YouTubers my age on YouTube that are in the beauty community in that particular generation. It would be the generation afterwards, which I think would be the boomer generation after me. But it really is true, and I've often wondered why they call us the silent generation, but my children can probably tell you better than anybody. But it's because we were born during the war, during World War II. We started out our lives in crisis, and when our parents were in crisis during World War II, a lot of wives had their husbands overseas. They were worried about them. Women were starting to work in the workforce because they were donating their time into the factories and working and taking the place of jobs that men used to hold before they went off to war. So those of us that were born in this generation really were born in a time of crisis. And because our parents were so involved in surviving during those years and so much stuff was going on, we kind of had to be quiet and go about our business and entertain ourselves and be self-sufficient. They say that people in the silent generation are the most responsible and self-sufficient generation ever. And it's because that we really had to step up to the plate and be that way because our parents were so busy initially when we were really little trying to survive. And when the war was over and the fathers came back and started working, then it became a very different time for all of us because the economy started to boom, things were good, and by the time we got out of school, jobs were readily available. But I can remember growing up, I can remember the air raid sirens when I was a little girl. I lived in the capital of the United States, and at night the air raid sirens would go off, and I was absolutely terrified because I didn't know what was going on. And my parents would draw, they had really heavy blackout blinds, they were called, so that you had to black out any light if you had any light on in the house. So I can remember the beginnings of my life. Even though I was really small and I didn't know anything about the war, I knew that things were happening that really scared me. And I really was afraid of those loud air raid sirens. But I also remember listening to the radio to Charlie McCarthy and We would sit down, and probably they say that my generation is the last generation to have family meals together. Because when the next generation came along, their kids were involved in activities after school, and TV dinners came, and people just were not spending the time sitting around the family table as much anymore. And I'm just giving general things because I'm sure maybe some people did, but the type of family life that I had, when my mother called us to dinner, we all came down, no matter what, and we ate dinner together and we talked to one another. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful time. You know, my daughter told me that she and her son have started watching the reruns of the Walton family. And I think that people now, today, are longing for that past generation where we were living and working as a family and when we were talking to one another. And I think that's why the reruns of the Waltons has become so popular today, because it's a nostalgic part of our lives that we really have lost. Our lives today are so different from that. The silent generation is a generation that they say really that has lived through and has seen more changes than any other generation, because really when I was little, a tube radio was so exciting. But then I have lived through all of the technology. When I was in college, Sputnik was put up into the air. And when my son, my last child, was born, he was born the day that our astronauts landed on the moon. So I have lived through all of those different things. They also say that we are the generation who has never felt sorry for themselves. And, you know, I think that really is true. If I have a problem or if something happens my whole life, I just get up and I go and I carry on. And a lot of times my children didn't know half of what we were all going through because I just didn't tell them. I was very silent and I never shared. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I am not sure today. But it was the core value that I was taught as a young woman. And they say that each generation, the silent generation, the boomers, the Generation X, every generation that comes, we have core values that we learn early in life during that time, that generational time. And that those of us who are in, say, the boomer generation or the Generation X or the silent generation, all of us in that generation do share the same core values because we learned those values from our parents and our teachers, and they were capturing and talking about and practicing the values of the day. We women in that generation really have bridged the women's movement. We were at the age when I know I was probably 20 or so, when that was going on, when Gloria Steinem and all of the women who were really involved in that movement. I was young enough to be able to benefit from that and to absorb that movement. I saw my mother just be a dutiful housewife. So my generation really bridged the gap between those two, between the housewife, and if you look at the old ads in the magazines of housewives, you know, dressed to the teeth for their husband when they came home and had a cocktail ready for him, and was always, you know, had a bandana around her head and was always vacuuming and doing things like that. That really was part of the generation that I grew up with. I just am so interested in this because until recently, I never thought about what generation I really was. But I know my husband, he's in his 90s, and he is a part of the greatest generation, which is true. But I thought, wow, that's really good to be part of the greatest generation. So I thought, what am I? I know about the boomers and the Gen X's, so I had to look it up. And I found out that I am the silent generation, and that probably is a good name for it because it's kind of who I am. I'm kind of quiet and silent, and I go about my business and I do what I have to do. So it's right on, I think, at least as far as I am concerned. But please, I honestly would love to know about your generation and whether or not you feel that you fit into that group, or if you are kind of a rebel and you don't think you belong to the boomers or the Gen X's. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know this was kind of an unusual video and a different type of conversation, but it's been on my mind, and it's life over 60, and you're all my friends, and I just feel like I'm sitting down and having a cup of coffee with you and sharing my feelings about my generation and my curiosity about yours. Don't forget to do something really good for yourself today, and to be kind to whomever crosses your path. And also, let's share the love. Let's not be silent, and let's let it all out and share the love, because we really want to save the world. Take care, and I will see you in my next video.